You're the kind of person who overthinks your own originality. You've got a million drafts, half-baked ideas sitting in your notes app, maybe a podcast you started, a design you never finished, a concept that felt genius in the shower, but now just feels flat, unoriginal, like someone else already said it better. You're terrified of being derivative, and even more terrified of being invisible. In today's episode, we're unpacking the quiet fear behind your creative block. The part of you that believes if it's not groundbreaking, it's not worth sharing. But what if the need to be original is exactly what's keeping you from being creative? Let's start here. You probably weren't trying to be unique at first. You were just trying to say something true. You were drawn to making things because you felt something, and you wanted other people to feel it too. But somewhere along the way, that impulse got hijacked. Maybe by comparison, maybe by self-doubt, maybe by the algorithm. And now, every time you try to create, you're not asking, what feels alive to me? You're asking, has this already been done? And here's the paradox. The more you try to avoid copying others, the more you abandon yourself. You start diluting your voice to sound smart. You second-guess every instinct. You spend hours researching what hasn't been said, instead of saying the thing that's burning inside you. And when that happens, creativity stops being expression. It becomes a performance. You're not showing up to create anymore. You're showing up to prove something, that you're clever, that you're special, that you're still worthy of being seen. But creativity doesn't come from trying to be seen. It comes from showing something real. Here's the contradiction no one talks about. The more obsessed you are with being original, the more creatively frozen you become. And not because you're not creative, but because your creativity has been hijacked by fear. See, most people assume the fear is simple. I don't want to copy anyone. But that's not the real fear. The real fear is, if I'm not original, I'm replaceable. And underneath that, if I'm replaceable, I don't matter. That's the actual crisis. Because for a lot of people, creativity isn't just a skill, it's their identity. It's how you cope, how you find meaning, how you separate yourself from the crowd. So, if your work starts to feel unoriginal, it doesn't just feel disappointing, it feels like you are disappearing. That's why it's so paralyzing. Because when being creative becomes your self-worth, every idea has to prove that you're still worthy. Every project becomes a test. Am I still special? And if the answer feels like no, you don't just feel uninspired, you feel defective. This is the real danger. The fear of being derivative doesn't just stall your output, it slowly erodes your sense of self. You start to confuse visibility with value. You start to believe that unless your idea is groundbreaking, you shouldn't even share it. You start measuring creativity by its impact, not its honesty. And worst of all, you start consuming more than you create. Endless scrolling for inspiration becomes a way to delay the terror of facing your own mind. You stay stuck in research mode, not because you're lazy, but because you're terrified that what's inside you won't be good enough. This is where the loop begins. The more you delay creating, the more creatively irrelevant you feel. The more irrelevant you feel, the more pressure you put on the next idea to redeem you. And the more pressure you put on it, the more likely you are to avoid it altogether. This doesn't just kill creativity. It kills your relationship with yourself. So why do you stay trapped? Why do you keep circling the same idea like it's radioactive? Too dangerous to touch, too precious to throw away. Here's what's really happening. You're not researching, you're rehearsing, not preparing to create, but preparing to survive the moment you finally do. You're gathering articles, frameworks, aesthetic references, not to build something real, but to build a defense. A shield for the voice inside you that already expects to be dismissed. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right angle, the right mood, the right spark. But what you're actually waiting for is permission, the unspoken kind. The one that says, okay, now what's inside you is safe to reveal. This is where the paralysis sets in. Because if you only feel safe creating when the outcome is guaranteed to be praised, you'll never actually start. The conditions will never be perfect enough, and every delay, every new tab, Every inspirational rabbit hole starts to feel like preparation, when really it's self-protection. Not from failure, but from disappointment in yourself. You're not lazy, you're haunted by the question, what if I finally try and there's nothing remarkable there? That's the loop. You delay because you care. You care because this matters, but the more it matters, the more dangerous it feels to do badly. So you keep circling, keep tweaking, keep pretending you're almost ready, when really you're just terrified of what might be missing. Not in the idea, in you. And the longer you orbit the idea without touching it, the more monstrous it becomes. Not because the idea changed, but because you started believing it's the last one you've got. That's what keeps you stuck. Not the lack of ideas, but the belief that this one has to prove your worth. Let me offer you a strange truth. The most original people you know are rarely trying to be original. They're just deeply in touch with something they've never fully said out loud. That's it. Not a gift. Not a genius strategy. Just a sharp intimacy with something they haven't resolved, and the willingness to explore it in public. You've been trying to make something that sounds new. They've been trying to say something that still haunts them. That's the difference. And here's where it flips. The more you try to invent creativity, the more it slips through your fingers, because invention lives in the head. But the real stuff? It starts in the body. It's that feeling you can't shake from 11th grade. The thing your parents said once that you still argue with in your sleep. The thing you felt for years but never put in a sentence because it always sounded too dramatic, too simple, or too sad. That's the raw material, not what makes you impressive, but what makes you alive. But you've been trained out of that. You've been taught to hunt for novelty like it's buried treasure, when really, the most compelling work comes from recycling the ordinary in a way that feels newly personal, not because no one said it, but because you finally did. If you still think being original means inventing something the world has never seen, let's look closer at the people we call icons. Steve Jobs didn't invent the smartphone. He didn't invent touchscreens. He didn't even come up with the idea of portable music. What he did was notice where the clunky parts were and smooth them out until they felt human. He didn't give the world a miracle. He gave it a mirror, a sleek, intuitive, beautifully lit reflection of things we already needed. And yet, we call him a visionary. Because vision isn't always about seeing the future. Sometimes, it's about noticing the present more clearly than anyone else. Take Beyoncé. She didn't create dance, or soul, or pop, or hip-hop. But when she moves, when she sings, it feels unmistakably like her. She draws from decades of Black musical tradition, from gospel choirs to Michael Jackson to African diasporic rhythms. And yet, when you watch her, it doesn't feel like imitation. It feels like embodiment. She's not praised for inventing the genre. She's praised for inhabiting it fully. Then there's Van Gogh, who we now worship as the blueprint for tortured originality. But if you look at his early work, he was copying classical figure studies, still lifes, Japanese woodblock prints. He mimicked his influences openly. He wasn't trying to be radical. He was just trying to translate something internal into something visible, something most people couldn't put words to. But he could paint it. He wasn't a genius because he was the first. He was a genius because he was honest. Even Shakespeare, the poster child of literary brilliance, borrowed nearly every plot he ever wrote. Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, none of them were entirely his. But what was his was the way he made them breathe. The psychological layers, the grief, the madness, the rhythms that still echo 400 years later. It wasn't the story that was new. It was the insight. And what about someone like Tyler, the creator? He's built an empire off weirdness, off refusing to be pinned down. But listen closely. You'll hear Pharrell in his production, Andre 3000 in his flow, punk soul, synth pop. He doesn't hide it. He celebrates it. And somehow, it still feels like no one else. Why? Because originality doesn't come from what you use. It comes from how much of yourself you put into it. These aren't people who sat around trying to be unlike anyone else. These are people who let themselves leak through the work, fully, strangely, repeatedly. So why are you holding yourself to a standard that not even your heroes lived by? Why do you believe that unless it's unprecedented, it's unworthy? If the artists, builders, and visionaries we admire most were just assembling pieces from what they loved, then maybe the pressure to be completely new is not only unrealistic, it's unnecessary. You don't need to break the mold. You just need to show us what it looks like when you step inside it. Because the thing that makes your work powerful isn't that it's never been done. It's that you were the one who did it. And when you create from that place, not to stand out, but to empty something that's been sitting inside you too long, something strange happens. People start calling it original, even when it's not. Because originality isn't about saying something new. It's about saying something real before you've edited it into oblivion. So where do you start? Not with a breakthrough, not with a perfect idea, just with what's been circling your head for too long, the line you keep rewriting, the image you can't let go of, the thought that feels too quiet to matter. Use that, not to go viral, not to impress, just to get a piece of yourself onto the page, or into the lens, or out of your mouth. So it stops sitting inside you like a weight. Because creativity isn't some thunderclap of genius. It's more like stretching a stiff muscle, awkward at first, a little uncomfortable, until something softens and you realize, oh, it still works. So instead of chasing the boldest concept you can find, ask yourself, what's the sentence I've been afraid to finish? What's the story I've been telling myself but never written down? That's the doorway. It doesn't need to be dramatic, just honest. You're not creating to make history. You're creating to clear space. And you don't have to finish it. You don't have to share it. Just make the room. One paragraph, one sketch, one sentence that feels a little too honest. You're not creating to prove anything right now. You're creating to remember there's still something in you that moves. If any part of this touched something real in you, it wasn't an accident. It means you're still carrying ideas, not perfect ones, not revolutionary ones, just human ones. Ones that might sound small in your head, but could echo loudly in someone else's life. You don't need a massive platform. You don't need the perfect title or a niche or permission from anyone. You just need to keep going, quietly, weirdly, honestly, because someone out there doesn't need something new. They just need something true. And if this video helped you remember that, there's more where this came from. This channel is full of episodes like this, the ones that don't hype you up, but walk with you through the parts you usually keep to yourself. So if you want company for the road ahead, subscribe. And if this cracked something open for you, tell me what it was in the comments. I read everyone. Now go make something. Not because you have to, because you still can. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.